What's the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning? When we talk about our beliefs, we sometimes hear people say things like, where's the proof? Or you can't prove that, in order to discredit those beliefs. And while those responses can sound fair and sound logical at face value, they sometimes assume that every belief must be proven with absolute certainty. But in reality, different domains rely on different standards of evidence. And so if we want to reason well, and I would argue reason consistently, then our expectations about evidence and proof should match the type of belief that we're evaluating. So in this video, we're going to look at the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning, and then consider which type of reasoning and which standards of evidence make the most sense when we're having discussions about God and Christianity. First, let's look at how we structure arguments in general. So when we want to support a claim, we usually offer a set of reasons, what philosophers call premises, in order to support that claim. So in its simplest form, an argument looks like this: premise 1, premise 2, therefore conclusion. For example, all mammals are animals, all dogs are mammals, therefore all dogs are animals. The premises are the reasons offered in support of the conclusion, and the conclusion is the claim that the argument is trying to show is true. Now, an argument can have one premise or it can have several, but in each case, reasoning moves from the premises to the conclusion. So now let's talk about how this structure relates to deductive and inductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, if the premises of an argument are true and if the reasoning is valid, then the conclusion must be true. So as an example, consider the rule from our earlier argument: all mammals are animals. If the second premise, all dogs are mammals, is valid, then the conclusion that all dogs are animals must be true. It's not probably true, it's definitely true. We have certainty. Here's another example of deductive reasoning. If a number is even, then the number is divisible by 2. 8 is even, therefore 8 is divisible by 2. Because the rule is true and the premise is true, then the conclusion must also be true. We use deductive reasoning like this in mathematics and in formal logic because they rely on precise rules and definitions. But outside of formal logic systems like this, outside of math, we often have complete information, and so we need to rely on other things like probabilities and patterns rather than fixed rules in order to reach conclusions. And so this is where we use inductive reasoning. In inductive reasoning, if the premises are true, then they provide evidence that the conclusion is likely to be true, but the conclusion could still be false. For example, consider this argument. The sun has risen every day in recorded history. The laws of nature appear stable. Therefore, the sun will probably rise tomorrow. Here, the premises don't logically guarantee the conclusion. They only tell us what has happened in the past, what has happened so far. Tomorrow could still be different, even if it seems extremely unlikely. Here's another one. So imagine you take the same bus to work every day, and for months it arrives at 8:05 a.m. So you conclude the bus will arrive at 8:05 a.m. tomorrow. That's a really reasonable conclusion based on the pattern. It's a reasonable belief, but the conclusion is not guaranteed, right? Tomorrow the bus could be late, maybe because of traffic or construction or mechanical problems, or the driver got sick, or something else. But this is how inductive reasoning works. The premises provide evidence, and the evidence makes the conclusion likely, but they don't logically guarantee it. And this is the type of reasoning that we use in things like science and history and many everyday decisions too, right? When we're answering questions like, does this medicine work? Or was Napoleon a real person? Or does this person love me? In science, we are observing patterns in nature and then using those patterns to predict what will happen next. And in history, we're examining ancient documents or writings from historians of the time and looking at different archaeological discoveries to determine what most likely happened. And then in everyday decision making, we're just looking at the available evidence and then using that to make judgments about what outcome is most likely or what is most likely true. In any of the cases, instead of applying rules that guarantees conclusions, we're evaluating evidence and then we're asking which explanation best fits the facts. So which type of reasoning should we use when forming beliefs about whether God exists or whether or not Christianity is true? Well, if we are being logically consistent, then we should primarily rely on inductive reasoning and expect others to do the same. So questions about God and Christianity, like whether or not a personal creator exists or whether or not Jesus rose from the dead, these are not mathematical or formal logic questions. They don't follow fixed rules. These are philosophical and historical questions that we can evaluate using evidence and reasoning. And what that means is that we shouldn't expect proof or absolute certainty in the way that we might expect it in mathematics. Instead, we should look for the same things we look for in other domains of inductive reasoning, and that's evidence. And then we can ask which explanation best accounts for that evidence. That leads to better and more intellectually honest discussions and ultimately helps us get to the thing that we hopefully want the most, which is the truth. So we've seen how deductive and inductive reasoning work, and that inductive reasoning makes more sense when we're having conversations about God. Next week, we're going to spend a little bit more time discussing what counts as good evidence, because as we all know, not all evidence is equal. And if you would like to see that or more content like this, you can click the subscribe button just below the video if you haven't already. But in the meantime, in the comments, I'm curious, do you think that we sometimes expect stronger proof for beliefs that we disagree with than for beliefs that we already accept? And, maybe this is just a personal one, but if you're a skeptic, I'm curious if you've ever maybe expected more than is reasonable for beliefs about God. And then what kind of evidence do you think belief about God should require? Of course, if you have other questions about apologetics or Christianity, you are very welcome to put those in the comments too, and I'll do my best to respond there or in a future video. And I'll see you next week.